See, there's people who are sending text messages. One of them, Wayne Bishop, is talking about DJs. Guys, I'm watching your messages on the screen. Very interesting.
We'll let Robin comment on Wayne's messages.
Yeah, because I can see that Wayne is so involved in texting. Hopefully, he's gonna text a lot of input during this.
Yeah.
This
all
session.
I'm going to say is I hope he gets our son to soccer practice on time. That's all.
He's got one job.
One job.
Drew, let's go, man. We'll try to sort it out in the background.
In the background. Okay, thank you, Pat. Everyone, Pat is our technical guy, so he's the one who's doing behind the scene, bringing you all this. So on behalf of Amasa, I would like to thank everyone who's taken the time to join us for this first installment of the new format of the Amasa Forum. And I'm saying the first installment because this year, Amasa has been working behind the scene to revamp their forums. So the new format is more inclusive. It involves people from the industry are now able to recommend forum themes, forum topics, and also on top of that, there's an opportunity to sponsor the forums. Basically, this is what we mean by inclusiveness. On top of that, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Spark Media, which are the first to get on board in this new format. They were involved in suggesting the topic, in researching. So Spark Media, thank you very much. We hope that you'll keep on continuing to support Amasa. And Amasa is not just a body, it's the industry as a whole. And we would like to thank our esteemed panelists. I'm going to start with Jonathan Cook from ENCA. He's the trade brand manager. Robin Bishop from Spark Media, head of marketing. We have Henny Maybeck from Jacaranda FM as a program manager. And we have Claire Trafankowska from iProspect SA, who will also be joining today's forum. Guys, without any waste of time, today's forum is of news audience. And I think if you look at the past 12 months, there's been a lot of interest in people wanting information, especially since the break of COVID. And our panelists today are going to help us to unpack this renewed relevance of the news audience, because I think most of them have got a background of news platforms, news content. And I'm gonna just hand over to them for their opening remarks. Jonathan, you are my target today, so everything is going to face you. Can you give us just opening remarks on how do you understand this renewed relevance of the news audience?
Well, firstly, thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody. It's an absolute delight to be here with everybody. I grew up with Amasa, was part of Amasa when I was young, and I certainly came through the community of what is Amasa. And when I mention the word community, I think it's befitting that we're having this type of meeting, in a virtual world, and we are a community. And welcome to all of those people that have made the effort to come in. I think communities, the idea of community has become more significant these days with the restrictions that things like COVID and has placed upon all of us. But certainly we live in interesting times, and news is always news, and the live news environment is very, very much at the forefront of the evolution of TV. And in some cases, the actual taking a few steps back, even though you're taking steps forward. I mean, when I talk about communities, again, a lot of people who are consuming their news on various different platforms have almost gone back to a community way of consuming news. Gathering around that TV, gathering around the radio, in a family forum, and almost reminds me of the days when we used to do it around the 8 o'clock news and the 7 o'clock news. So we live in fascinating times, and I welcome the other panelists. I'm honored to be one of the panelists with you, and I look forward to sharing many insights with everybody today.
Thank you for your remarks, Jonathan. I would like to go to our next panelist, Robin Bishop. Over to you.
Okay, well, I'm glad I'm not the only one who's going to be talking about communities, Jonathan. So I think, the localized version of news has become something so prominent in most recent times. We might have lost a little bit of the focus for a while things were globally connected, and we sort of lived in a much more globally connected world, but nothing like a pandemic to make sure that you're aware of what's happening close to home is what's most important to you on a day-to-day basis. So I think in this time where we've been kind of bombarded with news and information and misinformation and disinformation, and we're having an info pandemic as well as a normal pandemic, we have to decipher between what the news is that we want to engage with and we want to trust. And a lot of that comes back down to sociability and the relevance of who in our circle is standing for the kinds of news that we want to be absorbing. So I think the relevance of a news audience, as this topic adheres to today, is really about making sure that we're looking after the society in which we live by providing newsworthy content that is trusted and comes from well-researched, published journalists. So yeah, I think we have a need for journalism, we have a need for news, and nothing like the times we've been through to understand how important truth and the journey for truth is for the audiences out there.
Thank you very much. I like the emphasis on the fact that people need credible news. I hope Donald Trump is listening. I'm going to hand over to our next panelist, Henny Maybeck from Jacaranda FM. Henny, over to you.
Hey, Andrew, thanks. And thanks to the master team, and welcome everyone. I think that Jonathan and Robin have already touched on the importance of community. And I think that what's been really amazing in the last year or so, when everything started changing, was how communities were looking for trusted sources of information, and they were looking at members of the media to really inform them. They were looking at us as pillars within these communities, and I think that it's forced us to take a step back to really evaluate the importance of these communities and how we can influence, but also how we can inform and assist. And I think that's where the trust really becomes really critical. And I think that seeing how different communities require different amounts of information, different types of information, and being able to really serve them on a variety of different platforms, I think has been a real learning curve for all of us. But I think that it's been a really enriching experience, because it's forced us to really humanize and connect with a lot of our audiences and with a lot of information, and to really force that two-way conversation. So I'm looking forward to unpacking this more.
Thank you very much, Nee. Pat, once our next panelist is on, please let me know so that I can formally introduce them. I like the fact that you guys in your opening remarks are emphasizing on the community aspect of news, because obviously when you're talking about the community, you're talking about the consumers of the actual content in news platforms. What does this mean to our marketers and media decision makers, the people who want to connect with that audience from a commercial perspective? What would you say the renewed relevance of this audience can benefit them? How can it benefit marketers and media decision makers, including brands themselves?
Andrew, before I start, or maybe on that one, I just want to see. I see Claire is there. I don't know if you wanted to welcome there, Claire. There, I saw her there.
Okay, guys. Would like to welcome Claire Trafankowska from iProspect SA. Claire, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear, and that was a really good rendition of my surname, so thank you.
Yeah, I know that I'm good at bombing surnames, so I apologize for that.
No,
Welcome.
It was great. Thank you. sorry for the late appearance.
Yeah, well, at least we try to make sure that you catch the bus before it leaves. And I think from you, what we would like to know as your opening remark in terms of this renewed relevance of the news audience. What does it mean from the background that you're coming from?
I mean, look, I was listening with a lot of interest to everybody else's opening remarks because, I mean, I think the community piece is incredibly important, but I guess, you know, from my background and to your earlier question in terms of what does it mean for marketers and for brands, this renewed relevance of community and audience and the value, for me, it really brings connection to life. And I think that as soon as you start to move into the marketing and the brand space, you know, what does every brand want? They want to connect with an audience, but to really resonate and to really be meaningful. I mean, I think that that's a double-edged sword for a lot of people and for a lot of brands, because there's a fine line between getting it right and getting it wrong, and certainly in the context of quality journalism and sort of newsworthy content. But I mean, you know, news and great content has the ability to bring people closer together and bridge divides. And if a brand can find a comfortable space in that, where there's a strong sense of brand purpose and brand suitability, I think it can become quite a enriching experience for consumers.
Thank you very much for that remarks. Jonathan, you were on before Claire could take the stage.
Yeah, so if I can, you know, I think Claire also touched on something quite, you know, at the end of the day, when we look at it's sometimes counterintuitive with news, because, you know, when there's fear around, you know, the audience numbers go through the roof. You know, we see a spike in consumption of news. And, you know, when you look at news, there's always, you know, the locality being regional news has always been a priority for people. And I think it's you know, it's thrown us all, what it's done for me when I look at news is I like to keep it positive, because you've seen those companies that have been able to be nimble, who've really been able to be in a position. I mean, it's forced us to everything to happen a lot sooner, and those companies that were ready for it, you know, in terms of evolving with the way the consumer habits and consumption patterns have evolved, those companies that were able to evolve and be ready for the way that news has changed, and we were forced to change, I think have the ones that have benefited through this. And I think that, you know, when I look at it, it's getting so much more and more consumer centric. So from a marketer's point of view, it's how do you, you know, yes, the audiences have gone up, but it's now about how do you make use of all the different touch points and all the different access points to reach this news consumer who, you know, in today's time, the desire to be informed is in South Africa, I'm speaking about South Africa, is more profound than ever. I mean, people are tuning into our channel, or into our news channels, wanting not only information about the immediate fears about what's happening in their lives, but also, you know, education and information about this huge swelling middle class is wanting to better themselves in South Africa, you know, and it's a very positive thing for me. So even though we've all been like thrust into this, you know, doing all kinds of things that, you know, with COVID and change of patterns and things, I think it's actually been a lot of positive stuff that's come out of it. And I think that the challenge is for marketers to evolve and to embrace the new way of doing things. And those that can will survive and flourish, and those that can't, we've seen that they've, you know, fallen by the wayside.
Thank you, Jonathan. Henny, from your side, what can you unpack from the aspect of marketers and media decision makers leveraging the renewed relevance of the news audience?
So I think that in the last year, what's come with a lot of this, while there's been a lot of community building, there's been a lot of information sharing, there's been a lot of sensitivity around what information needs to be shared. You know, the balance between being first and being right, for example, you know, like all of those things become more and more relevant. But at the same time, I think from a marketer's perspective, where I think that there's been great strides is in really understanding those communities and understanding those audience on a more granular level than ever before. I think that with deployment of DMPs, being able to really understand what audiences care about and being able to super serve that has also given us some insight as to how communities have evolved and developed and how they differ, and how we're able to offer different information in different segments or in different platforms, you know, based on what they would find relevant. So audiences have become really, I want to say, demanding, in the sense that they expect a constant flow of information. They expect that information to be correct, but we can't offer them all of the information all the time. I think that being able to serve the relevant information to the relevant audience is something that has really played into this renewed relevance as we talk about today. And I think that having the ability to understand those audiences and to connect to them and to create that common ground really means that we create a much deeper trust relationship with them, which has a lot of value for marketers and for brands and for media houses and for all of us.
Thank you very much. Robin, I can see you getting yourself ready to give your point of view. What's your take?
I guess my take is that, you know, it comes down to a bit of the attention space. So what marketers can get out of a news audience is quite a captive audience. They've come there intentionally to consume news. They're doing that on purpose. It's not something that they are not associating with advertising. They know that that's what to expect. So when Jonathan said in the old days you'd gather around the TV to watch the 8 o'clock news, and that kind of is happening again, where you can see people are tuning in for specific bits of newsworthy content. I think that's where the whole idea of who came first, the chicken or the egg, the advertising or the audience is making a reappearance, because our audiences proliferated for quite a long time. You know, they went all over the show and they were chasing entertainment and they were chasing other content, but we're kind of seeing that pullback to strong numbers in news is where the attention is that advertisers want. I mean, let's face it, advertising is starved for attention, for human attention, and humans are consuming news. So it's a great meeting point of minds where marketers can interact with newsworthy content. I think marketers are forever chasing what's trending and what the next content theme is going to be. News is providing that consistently. They've curated the content all this time. It's just that it's now reaching a peak again where it's got a renewed relevance in the lives of the consumer, and therefore hopefully in the brand's minds as well.
Very interesting, because I think, you know, we all know how much started the com space is nowadays. And if you can be guaranteed a good quality audience, which gives you attention, I think, you know, every brand will really like that. And I think, like, you know, talking about attention, in the early weeks of COVID, when it broke in South Africa, I think it was around first week to mid-March, some of the websites which were measured by AIB showed a 47 increase in news sites, and people were looking for information in particular. And at some point, we know that there was fatigue about what consumers were consuming, because like everyone was like, they want to know about this virus, they want to know what's going to be the vaccines, the cure, and all that stuff. Do you think we've now passed through that fatigue state? Because I think it was a state where everyone was like looking for one thing. Do you think the renewed relevance that we're talking about currently has passed that stage of fatigueness in terms of consuming news content?
Are you asking me, Andrew?
Anyone, any takers?
So I don't think we passed the peak of it. I think we're still in it. I think we definitely have seen the highest heights that we will have seen. We've experienced the highs, but I do think that people are keeping a consistent track on things like third waves, travel restrictions, all sorts of topics, and that might differ by audiences or by communities or by groups that it renews the relevance for. So I don't think that we completely have passed it and we completely fatigued on coronavirus. No, I think there's a consistency that will remain, but I do think that you dip in and dip out depending on your circumstances, and that might be based on a community or on an interest. If you're itching to travel, you'll be following the restrictions closely, whereas if you are working in healthcare, you'll be following it from a vaccines point of view, or if you're aged or you've got diabetes, like different pockets of the news will interest you differently at different times. So that's how I see it. I don't think it's gone.
Would you mind if I jumped in?
You know, be my guest.
So I want to just sort of build on what Robin said, and if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the earlier question. But I mean, I really do agree with Robin in the fact that, you know, this resurgence of interest in news and sort of quality, trustworthy, you know, verifiable news. And I think what it's done is it's brought the readership, sort of the digital readership back. Yes, albeit it's, you know, quite a negative context initially. And I suppose it invigorates the journalism side of things somewhat as well, because, you know, now that you have this captive audience, yes, there's global news and travel and bans and vaccines. And there's a lot of content that we can talk about, but there's also the opportunity to bring in the richness of storytelling again, because they may be there for a particular reason, but you've got the opportunity to continue engaging with them and to sort of build out those communities and I suppose build out those consumer journeys within your platforms. And just sort of going back to, while I've got the floor, just going back to the earlier question, Robin, I think you and I need to have a coffee, because I think we'd have a great conversation. And there were a couple of things that I really loved. One of them was human, because I think anybody who knows me knows that I come with a little bit of a soapbox, which is viewability. And I think that as soon as you start to talk about quality journalism and the context and the environment of sort of this rich news space, and obviously the value that it's giving the audience, and obviously the value the audience is bringing with it, you start to move into a very rich territory that becomes coveted space for a brand. Because what do brands want? Brand wants humans. We want a human. We want a human to see our advertising, and you're attracting humans. So yes, there's some brands that when it comes to suitability and safety, you know, news is not for them, but that's okay. But, you know, you're providing a brand safe environment when it comes to the likes of ad fraud, you know, bots, viewability, because there's a lot of studies that have been done, if you look at sort of Lumen research, that when you look at new sites, because you've got a captive audience, there's higher viewability when it comes to companion advertising. So if you strip away all the layers and you're just looking at some brilliant basics and what's become the foundation of digital marketing, news offers that. And quality news offers that. Then you can bring back the layers and bring in sort of the emotive context, and you bring in sort of that, you know, that emotional bond. And I think that, you know, I'm somebody who I haven't been able to see my family since November 2019 because they're all over the world. And, you know, I'm one of those in those travel communities wanting to understand at what point can I exit the country and go and see them? And what I think that it's done from a COVID perspective, and I'll always go back to the human nature, and it's that link. We've got a shared trauma through COVID. And yes, we're wanting to find information for ourselves, but we're also experiencing something that other markets and other regions have gone through. You know, we've got India going through, you know, terrible times at the moment. We've had other markets that have been there. And for the first time, not the first time, but sort of, you know, I suppose in my generation, there's this collective intent and need, and this desperate want to be connected, to want to sympathize, to want to understand what everybody's going through. And I think that that's a very, very powerful space to be.
Wow, that's well said. That's well said.
If I can just add to that, because I think Claire made a really good point about storytelling. You know, I mean, news has benefited from this initial uplift, and storytelling is really something that, you know, if you look at the flip side of it, the proliferation of news is that, you know, one of the enemies is this post office journalism where, you know, we've really had to introspect and say, okay, are we telling good stories? Are we able to understand how to tell the stories on the various different platforms? And I think that, you know, with the things like Twitter, and, you know, you can't beat Twitter for the speed of getting to market with a story, but you can certainly beat Twitter in terms of the research and the fact, you know, the facts and the. So I think it's this understanding and being able to just understand that, you know, that journalism is one of those callings, one of those things that people, it's somebody who's a certain ilk of person. And going back to what Claire said about storytelling, is about the ability to tell stories that people can relate to. And I think that's really what's attracted people to the category of news, and that it's something we can all share and it's factual, you know.
Henny, what's your take?
Yeah, so I think just to add on to what Jonathan was saying, I think that having gone through this or still experiencing this lived experience, or the common lived experience throughout the last year, whatever, has forced us to humanize a lot of the stories and a lot of the content. And I think that the value in that is that audiences have really responded to the way that brands and media companies have been able to really show some vulnerability at times, but also show a layer of authenticity. And I think that authenticity and that realness really builds on trust. And I think that we've seen now more than ever how audiences are really responding to trust in a way that they would have before, but it's really become a critical part of how we tell our stories, how we engage, how we preface something, how we get a message across. All of that needs to come from a trusted source, from a place that's real and authentic, and that way can just really land the message a lot clearer.
Okay, I just want to check with Pat. Pat, do you have any questions, any comments from the audience side?
Yes, there's some questions if you look in the Q&A section, Andrew.
Okay.
But if you don't mind, I can read them out for you.
Please read them for us. because I'll
Okay.
make notes here.
There's a question from Simone. She says, agree with how news have shifted according to the intent of what the audience want to find out about. I also find I tune in and search for news when I'm looking for it. So it is not today part based anymore. How do you leverage this, knowing that news is now segmented to a consumer perception of when something is relevant and which differs person to person? So the question is, how do you leverage that news is now segmented to a consumer perception of when something is relevant, which differs from person to person?
Okay, and I think when Claire was unpacking her part, she did mention that if you are someone who's willing, who wants to travel, you'll definitely start following up how restrictions are relaxed in different countries. I think that Claire just jump in, if perhaps you can clarify, because I think it goes exactly to the question that people will check the news based on what they want to know.
So I think that it's not just a news thing. Consumers have long passed what suits as publishers, marketers, advertisers, and it really is all about them. What suits me? When do I want it? When do I need it? And I think that makes it also quite exciting, because how do you curate a superior customer journey? And there's a lot that goes into it, but I guess that what it means is, from a publishing and from a journalism perspective, it's always on. So, I mean, as long as the content is always, it's fresh and it's updated and it's there, as long as it's accessible, it's snackable, and obviously there's versions. You'll get one story and you'll get a customer. And this again goes back to what Jonathan elaborated on from the storytelling perspective. Storytelling happens in different formats and across different platforms. So it'll go back to the data. It's really having to understand your communities, having to understand that, based on the data behind the content and those key stories, how do they want to consume it? Do you have an email database that you can send a daily roundup because you understand that this community or this customer segment wants to receive it like that? And I mean, I think if you think of all of our big news platforms, some of their greatest traffic is driven through Facebook, because people want the content when they want the content. So, you've got it published on a platform, on a website, and it's promoted and distributed through Facebook, because they've understood that community or that customer segment spends a lot of time in that environment. So I think, to Simone's question, it's just ensuring that whatever quality content and journalism is being created and developed, that it is in the most accessible places possible, based on a deep understanding of your communities and customers.
Thank you very much. I think Simone has got the answer right there. I want to touch on the news aspect, where previously news used to be seen as a very serious environment. And as a brand, for you to be creative, it was not easy. It's like this is the news. Like for instance, you'll see people just booking spots on TV on the news clock, that 15-seconder. Or if it's newspapers, you have to also get some permission from the editor, the editorial team, whether you can change the color of the front page. If it's a radio, it's also like a serious environment. Have we gone beyond that? Have we made the news platform a platform where you can also have fun as a brand? Have we reached that? This goes to all of the panelists.
Andrew, you sound like someone who's tried to change the cover of the newspaper before, eh?
No, I've been around,
Listen,
so I
think out of necessity, things often change. So if I can, just from an ENCA perspective, I mean, we have been pushed by strategists and planners to look at things differently, and it's this evolution where, if you look at, we like to say it's fit for purpose. Someone might be wanting to tell a story that actually has a lot of correlations similar to a story that you might be telling. And I think the days of just saying, no, we just can't do this and we can't do that, I think those days have changed. I think that you've got to sort of identify on a case-to-case basis. And with the opportunity now to have all these different, you've got social media, you've got web, you've got so many different ways of doing campaigns and touch points that I think you can't just say no. You've got to find ways and outlets. I mean, Kay mentioned snackable content. If you look at sitting down to watch a half an hour or an hour news program in news, it just doesn't happen anymore. People go in and out of news. They crossing platforms. You might come in to get the headlines, but it's not all news. It's not all breaking news and hard-hitting news. There's current affairs and there's collaborations that can happen, with content, snackable content that people can come in and get information that's predicated on dispensing practical information they can use in their daily lives, So that journey and understanding your audience and your customer when they come in is so important, because you just don't have them for as long as you had them before.
Very interesting. Any takers?
Yeah, I'll add on a little bit there. I think that we have to be able to understand. We have to understand the why and what the brand or the client is trying to achieve in that space, because news is often very serious, especially within a South African context, but it's also very real, and it's something that all of us really care about. It's really important. It impacts our daily lives. It changes often to such an extent that how things happen this morning are very different to how they happen this afternoon. And I think that part of the responsibility that we have as media organizations is to be able to adjust and to be agile and to be flexible to capitalize on some of the current affairs that are happening, and just to be able to see where there is space for someone to Andrew, you mentioned have fun, but to be able to maybe push those boundaries a little bit and to be able to try something that'll land a message or to really get you noticed in a real authentic way. I think that there are ways to do that where we don't necessarily interfere with the integrity of news. I think we need to be very careful when it comes to editorializing something or trying to mask something. I think that we need to be very careful and responsible in that sense. But at the same time, I think that we're all really in a space where we can look at trying things a little bit differently, or trying to be innovative and to try something and to go on that journey with a brand or a client, and to be able to say to them, great, let's try this. And if it doesn't work, we need to also be okay to learn from it and to move on. And sometimes it'll work, and then we can share in some of the spoils, right? So I think that there is a little bit of collaboration that needs to happen, and a little bit of open-mindedness that needs to happen.
Andrew,
interesting.
I've got a few examples. I've got a few things that popped into my mind on this kind of topic, and I think that there've been some real smart shock tactics that have used the news environment before, where I'm not actually 100% sure, so I'll have to double check some of these as case studies. So I won't quote any mastheads or any names, but I think what's been done before is like a blank page as a cover, saying like a world without news, just kind of bringing home the idea that without a printed page, it's such a shock to the consumer or to the reader to not have enough information. And then I think on the topic of us being a serious kind of platform, right? It's not an entertainment platform, although some news does entertain. I think the seriousness is something that we should never walk away from, because the credibility of being so responsible is where you get these great campaigns where KFC did the FCK apology notice in a newspaper. Facebook has taken out apology pages in newspapers, public safety announcements for listeriosis outbreaks. All those kinds of campaigns go through news or news platforms because of the seriousness and because of the credibility. So if you get too playful, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be innovative, because I do think they're very different, but to get too playful is a danger to what the responsibility of the news environment is. But you can be innovative, taking over mastheads, doing things for attention or for the shock tactic. I think the Santon Chronicle once ran the masthead for the blood bank, showing that the red was drained out of the masthead of the Santon Chronicle to show that there wasn't enough blood supply. Those are clever, that's not damaging to a news brand. It's hard hitting and innovative. The other campaign that came to mind was something like Breaking Ballet, where they followed the news trends in Twitter and created a perception change for ballet in a way that no one had thought of before. It wasn't necessarily the news environment being in Twitter as a social media space, but they used trending topics to showcase ballet as, I think it was the drought in Cape Town, it was the money fight that was taking place, the boxing match. And that shifted perceptions because it was just so, and I think people are hesitant to get innovative in the news space, but it's so worthwhile trying to take something trend-worthy or newsworthy on and make it impactful, because you've got such a captive audience in that space. They really are open to seeing things quite differently and getting behind a cause or supporting some kind of campaign or perception change that needs to be made. So it's definitely a place that doesn't happen enough, but it should, and it should do it for the right reasons. Okay.
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo some of what Robin said, that I think the right reasons are what's it's vital. And I like that we're talking about responsibility, because it's our responsibility to remain credible. And if I think of my experiences with brands and how we may or may not have tried to venture into the news space, I do still think it's considered quite sacred ground because of what it stands for in people's lives. People, just like we spoke about getting around the TV, it's still a ritual. People wake up and some people will check Facebook but they're looking for news, and some people go on and they're reading their newsletter, or they're actually going onto the platform and that's how they start their day, being updated. And I think that our responsibility as an industry is to preserve the nature and that sort of pristine context, because we want people to explore. And yes, we have conversations about how can we innovate, but it has to be responsible. And if you don't mind, I was just looking at the Q&A, and I think this fits quite nicely into it, because Lynn had a question about how does a brand build a bridge between content that is often negative and political and still deliver a message that is relevant, positive, and build the brand. And I think this is so relevant for what we're talking about right now, is what are the right moments for a brand to intercept a consumer whilst they're consuming their quality journalism, and how can you associate a brand responsibly, knowing that you've got a responsibility to the brand, to the consumer, as well as to sort of the publishing house. And I think it's quite a fine line. And I spoke about it earlier, and I spoke about brand safety, suitability, and brand purpose. And I think purpose plays a really big part in this, because what is the purpose of the brand in the conversation? So we've all seen that there's been brands that have, something's happened and they've just suddenly jumped on the bandwagon. But if you've never spoken about that topic before, whether it's gender-based violence or sort of fees must fall campaign, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of rich conversation that's really relevant for our markets, for everybody living in South Africa, but not all brands have a role to play in that conversation. And I think it takes it takes a lot of understanding, a lot of thinking to see where that fit is, that you get a positive experience for everybody. I think that we spoke about Twitter, and we know when we've got it wrong. Twitter tells us we've got it wrong. They're the first to shout that this was not okay. And I think that we, again, not going to talk about any nameplates, but I think that we can all think of one or two quite recently where it has just gone horribly wrong. And it is a responsibility with everybody, you know, we're all representing different sides of the industry here, to call each other out and say, no, you don't have a place here. Don't do that, because it's at the detriment of the audience who we value, as well as the publishing house because they've allowed it, as well as us as sort of the agency, because, you know, look, client is client, and you know, we might share our opinion, but sometimes it doesn't have an impact. But if you've got a trusting relationship, you know, we need to listen, and we need to listen to the audience as well. So yeah, I mean, I love that we're talking about responsibility. Not sure if it really answered Lynn's question, but
I haven't seen Lynn's question, but I think the way you've covered it, I think it did it in one way or the other. And I think the fact that, in essence, we're saying there needs to be collaboration, because the news audience content provider, they understand their audience. So they're the one who must also guide the clients as to when and how to be creative, so that it's not just being creative for the sake of being creative. So I think that's how I understand it. Patrick, anything from your side in terms of questions that you're picking up? I think Pat is taking a beer break. All right, guys, there was one aspect that was mentioned earlier, the brand safety aspect that is provided by news platform. How wide is it understood in the fact that news platforms has the safest brand platform that any brand can think of? Because I think this brand safety, it came about mostly when digital actually started growing rather than other mediums. But I think to me, it's how do clients understand the importance of their brand being safe in the news audience platform?
Could I jump in on that one?
Yeah, any takers?
Okay, thank you. I think that so brand safety is subjective, and I think that's the first challenge, is that there is no set standard that all brands can ascribe to. For example, and I'm going to have to nameplate here, I mean, Nando's. So Nando's does very well, having developed a tone of voice and a personality when it comes to sort of political content and context. And again, it's that in and that out. And when we talk brand safety to a bank is not going to be the same as brand safety to a Nando's. So I think that's the first thing. So brand safety, there's two parts to it. One is the context and the environment in which the brand appears in, which is going to differ based, you know, per brand. And the other one that I was referring to is brand safety in the sense of, you know, ad fraud and viewability sort of go hand in hand with that because, you know, higher viewability, less ad fraud because of higher credibility is going to be a more safe or more brand safe environment. But I think it is just quite important to understand that there's a technical aspect to it because you've got humans and attention. That is one factor of it. And then there's an environmental fit. And that's where it gets quite interesting. And that's where it's quite unique because, and that's why I said earlier, news is not for everybody in terms of brands because from a technical perspective, we use different platforms, whether it's Double Verify, IAS or Moat. And that gives us the feedback data to determine whether wherever the ads were placed, was it brand safe? But brand safe is defined as, was it in crime, political, nudity, violence? And if you, and it's often a really tough question that we get asked a lot, is that we know that the audiences are there. So brands often have to make a trade-off. What is more important? Will I settle for understanding that I'm reaching the right consumer in a highly viewable, human, mitigating ad fraud environment, and the opportunity cost is I might appear next to some form of story, it's political and it's criminal, or whatever the case. And often the value of the audience and the scale of the audience wins. But it's a balancing act for brands, because some brands have stronger values, whether it's global or local, and that will determine where they can or cannot appear.
Anyone?
Just to add to that, I think there's also a skill. I mean, various platforms offer different levels of security, or if you look at social media, everybody's got an opinion, and I think it's so tempting because we know that they're complementary. If you look at TV and digital, is very complementary if you get it right. So it's very tempting for a strategist to use them together because they know they're going to get the benefit of extra additional uplift. So it's just it's a skill and an art of getting it right. I think that we're always learning. People are always learning. I mean, you've got a lot of international examples, and you've got a lot of local examples where we've got it right and where we've got it wrong. And I think that's what makes things so exciting to those youngsters out there. It's a very exciting time to be in media, because everybody's learning. I mean, us as panelists, we're learning all the time. Every day we come in, we're challenged by our clients, we're challenged by the strategists like you, Andrew. And that's the exciting thing about this business, is that you're part of history often in just coming to work in a day.
So everyone else is on mute, so I'm going to use it as a chance to say something. But I think we've got to be very careful between brand safety and maybe what brand sensitivity is, because I think what we're trying to do as marketers is avoid unintended consequences. So we want to run our ad for a new car, but we don't want it to appear on a page where there's going to be a report of a car accident, or you just don't want to have a high impact news story kind of undermine or seem like it was placed. And I think that those examples, as much as there are those, they're very far and few between. So we're trying to avoid situations that are unintended consequences of trying to reach a quality audience. But in doing so, I think we're also taking away what we think our audiences are capable of discerning for themselves. So I've got some stats here on how 86% of people know that the role news brands play is to keep them up to date with stories. And sometimes those stories might be upsetting and shocking, but they're not necessarily going to blame the brands that are advertising in that environment for the upsetting stories. So I think sometimes we've got to give the humans that are reading these news stories a little bit more credibility for them to be able to discern what was intentional versus what was not. And Nando's is absolutely intentional, and that is completely their brand personality. And so people can see the humor in it and enjoy it. When something does go wrong, brands apologize and people get over it, and it is explained as an unintended consequence. So I think we've got to be careful not to try and have too much control as advertisers and marketers, because we are dealing with a somewhat intelligent consumer out there who is also able to see that an ad is an ad and content is content. They're still able to make the distinction. And brand sensitivity and brand safety are two very separate issues. And I agree, brand safety has to be taken extremely seriously, but I'm not sure that brand sensitivity always needs to be ultra controlled. So that's my 2 cents on the topic, Andrew.
Well said. Henny, on your side, I was on mute the other time. I don't think you hear me.
No problem. I'm glad you were on mute because Robin had some great points there. I think that that balance between brand safety and sensitivity, the way that you put it now, is absolutely spot on in my opinion as well. I think that we need to be careful and consider what could happen, but I think we also need to be able to balance it out with what probably would end up happening. And I think that we often miss out on those chances to capitalize, or Claire, to your point, to be able to reach really, really big audiences in places where a lot of traffic is driven to. And I think a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of those principles around what gets a lot of attention is around shock and awe kind of stories. But I think that at the same time, I think being able to to acknowledge that, especially within a news context, you have an audience that's informed. And I think it goes back to our point that we discussed earlier on knowing your audience. And I think the more that you know about them, the more we're able to engage a brand, to be able to give them some level of info. We can't guarantee anything, but I think to be able to illustrate the tolerance that the audience on a specific platform might have for different messages. And I think that that's something that really equips all of us to make better decisions.
Well, I think this is very interesting, your input, guys. We are now on the hour mark. We will be going for like closing remarks, and then we'll also check with Pat if he's got anything from our audience as well. And then if there's anything, Pat, you can jump in. If not, I'm going to ask my panelists just to give some closing remarks in terms of
Andrew.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, thank you.
Let's do a crossover to Facebook. We've got a question.
Okay, go for it.
We've got a question from
Pat, I'm not sure if we have a break in transmission there. I can't hear you. Okay, if any of my panelists can hear Pat, please feel free to jump in if you have an answer for the Facebook question.
No, nothing, Andrew. Unfortunately.
Sorry, it didn't come through, Andrew.
Okay, I think it's a problem with transmission there. But I think from my side, I would like you guys to give your closing remarks in terms of how you see this renewed relevance of new audience into the future. We know our country at the moment is so newsworthy, it's not funny. We saw the development last week, and we are headed to anticipated third wave. We headed to the elections. You know, I think even myself, every time before I sleep, I check something that relates to the news because I don't want to miss out. So how do you see this renewed relevance of the news audience going forward into, let's say, the near future, actually?
Okay. I'll go first. So I think that from my side, this resurgence of a news audience really is an appeal to everyone in the marketing and the consumer citizenry to respect news for what it does for our country, and as a democracy, recognize that we need the news. So I would say that advertisers who err on the side of caution in supporting the news because of their fear of brand sensitivity re-look at the way that you approach a news audience, because what you've got in a news audience is an attentive amount of humans who are contextually aware of what kind of framework they're working with, what kind of news stories they could be exposed to, but also that people have always associated content with advertising in the news space. So it's not something that they're going to find intrusive. They're actually intentionally going to embrace whatever brands are in that news space. And I think that it's a real call or an appeal to society as a whole, the readers out there, the advertisers, the publishers, to keep supporting news, because journalism and the ability to disseminate news gives us an informed citizenry, which makes voting happen, which makes a democracy stay strong. And I think cumulatively, that is how society actually moves forward. And we want to be able to progress as a human race. So news is fundamental to all of our lives.
Oh, well said,
Thank you very much, Robert.
And Pat's
Jonathan, you seem to be next.
Yeah, look, I agree with Robin. I mean, I think it also encourages debate, and you know, the country needs to debate things. You know, there's topics, there's things that you know, by talking about things, it makes us better and stronger. I mean, it's, as I always say, live TV is what, or when it comes to TV and news is live, and it's a hell of a place to play in. And I think that, you know, for the youngsters, you know, who are thinking of getting into the industry, or the young planners, and that, you know, I see one of the questions asking, you know, like the responsibility of news, and how, you know, can it be detrimental in, you know, in creating stigmas and things like that. I think the beautiful thing about news today is that it's in the consumer's hands. You know, they can get, it's like a healthy meal. You can get as much as you want. You can overeat. You can, you know, be constantly listening to news. You can be constantly on your phone, constantly on the TV, or constantly reading newspapers, or you can be taking it as part of your daily diet. You know, getting a bit of fiber, a bit of vegetables, and a bit of sweets. You know. And I think that it's, the good thing is, as Robin said, you know, you can almost look at your society and you can say through news, it's an important part in people's lives. And I think have a bit of balance of it, so you can be informed, you can contribute to the conversation. And, you know, yes, news won't always get it right, but be part of the solution. I mean, you know, as a consumer, you're part of the whole journey. So that's my bit there. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.
Henny, yeah, you can take it.
I think that you're right. We do sometimes get things right and we get things wrong, in the same way that we sometimes get other content right and other content wrong. And I think that we need to be able to look at news, or the news environment, almost as like a conscious content kind of space. I think that it's a space where we content and news blends into each other so seamlessly within a South African context. And I think that we need to be able to treat it with the respect that it deserves, but at the same time, it also definitely deserves our support. I think that by supporting journalism and by supporting news and news products in the country, you know, we managed to do more, and we managed to advance as a country. We managed to really exercise that freedom of speech and freedom of press. And I think that knowing where we can all play a role, I think that engaging in these sorts of conversations more will really just help us, because I think the honest truth sometimes is that a lot of us don't know, and a lot of us are scared, and we end up not doing it. Instead of having these conversations, trying to see where some of these insights lie, and how we can make more informed decisions. But supporting those platforms, most definitely. And I think that being able to find your space within that conversation can really unlock a lot of value for a lot of people.
Claire, your closing remark?
Thank you. I don't think that I've got too much more to add to my co-panelists, but just sort of imparting, in terms of sensitivity, I think that applies to consumers as well. And I really liked the sentiment that not only is it important, but, you know, news deserves our support. And, you know, back to Simone's comment earlier, It's there when I need it. And if I don't want to, I don't have to tune in. So I do think the more that we talk about this, the more that we talk about the value and the shared lessons and experiences, I really do hope that as an industry that we continue to support it, because I just can't get away from the way that news connects us to each other and connects us to the world around us. And I do think that's fundamental for our progress.
Oh, thank you very much, guys. I think our conversation is going to carry on Facebook, because I know that we have a very engaging audience. So if you can pass by Facebook, if there's any question that you feel is relevant to you, just pop in. We'll thank you more. And thank you for your selfless time to the panelists and everyone who joined us on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube. Please, let's meet again probably next month. And then if you need to come and sponsor the next forum, please feel free to contact any of the AMASA committee members. They will take you through the new format and the whole process. And thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Henny. You made this a successful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marsa.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, guys. And Claire, we'll do that coffee.
I think we need to.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
On behalf of Spark Media, thank you to all the audience for attending as well. Big thank you. Glad it was such a success.
Thank you very much.
Bye.